Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. We are children of the light. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. It is common for people to perceive themselves according to their present realities. A person in ill health says, "I am ill." Few say, "I am well, it is my body that is suffering." People in a low income bracket say, "I am poor." Only the unusual person will say, "Though outwardly I live in poverty, inwardly I am wealthy." Thus, when it comes to moral and spiritual development, people commonly identify themselves with their weaknesses and their mistakes. They consider it almost a sign of humility to say, "I am a sinner," though in effect what this means is that they identify themselves with their sinfulness, not with the soul's power to transcend all limitations in God. The great masters, including Jesus Christ, have always emphasized the divine potential of mankind. To encourage us, they address us as children of light, not darkness. The Bible, in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 3, makes the point that our true home is not the mud of this earth, but the light of heaven. No man hath ascended up to heaven, it tells us, but him that came down from heaven. This passage continues, "Even so, the Son of Man who is in heaven," emphasizing that Jesus, though he lived on earth, is perceived by the eye of wisdom as conscious, even in human form, of his true reality in heavenly spheres. The way to know God is to live in godly consciousness, and not to bewail our imperfection and our distance from God. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And the Bhagavad Gita states, "Seekers of union with the Lord find him dwelling in their own hearts. But those who, lacking in wisdom, seek him with impure motives, cannot perceive him, however much they struggle to do so." If you want to know God, Paramahansa Yogananda said, live in the thought that you have him already. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Either I got taller or this thing got shorter. I prefer to think I got taller. As many of you know, perhaps not everyone, a group of us returned from India just days ago. I didn't know I had the talk to give until Padma pounced it on me, but fortunately I didn't have to prepare a whole lot. We were there in India at the home of our guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, on the March 7th, on the day in which in 1952 in Los Angeles, California, he left this earthly plane. He left his body in the state known as Maha Samadhi, the great exit of the soul consciously from the physical form. And so we were blessed, and we planned it, to be blessed, to be there at his home in Kolkata, if you prefer, on that day. He said, in respect to his future passing many decades ago, he would go speaking of my India and my America. And he recited, in his very last words, were taken from his own poem entitled My India. And I would like to start there. There it is. Just reading an excerpt. "Not where the musk of happiness blows, nor in lands where darkness and fears never tread, Not in homes where unceasing smiles reign, nor in heaven or prosperous lands would I be born. If once more I must assume a mortal garb, 1,000 famines may rack my body, waste my flesh, and leave me prostrate, yet would I be born again in Hindustan. 1,000,000 thieves of disease may steal my flesh in clouds of fate, send scalding showers of searing sorrow, yet would I prefer in India to reappear. Is this love of mind a blind sentiment, spurning reason's guidance? Far from it. I love India because it was there I first learned to love God and all things beautiful. It has been a tradition down through centuries, millennia really, of souls going on pilgrimage. And while it's true we can't find what we don't bother to seek within ourselves, pilgrimage is a metaphor for the human experience of life and seeking. We are born to seek. It doesn't mean we have to literally travel, but as soon as we are willing to do that, then our hearts open. Our journey to India had several features to it, one of which we purposely disguised, which our pilgrims brought up before our embarrassed faces, which is something we didn't put in the brochure, which is called simply tapasya. It is the hardship that pilgrims endure. Centuries ago, people from Russia, Great Britain, Germany, France would travel sometimes by foot. If they were a little more better off, they might have a horse. They would travel to Rome or to Jerusalem, Muslims to Mecca, Hindus to Benares, and the more adventuresome ones to the Himalaya, even beyond the Himalaya to what is now Tibet, to circumnavigate the great Mount Kailash. Some go to expiate their sins, so to speak, hoping they can die in peace, as it were. But the true devotees go because we know that our home is in God, and that the willingness to undergo the hardships and difficulties, yes, and nowadays the expense as well, to bring ourselves into the land of saints. India is the mother of all religions. In India, every form of worship, devotion, sublime and even debased, can be found. Her essential revelation is today's topic. We are children of the light. That revelation, later articulated thousands of years later in the Vedas, predates even what we call Hinduism. Indeed, predates every other religion we know of, historically, on this earth. For it comes from a time and a place and from a state of consciousness that has nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do with truth. And so we embarked together. All of us boarded our plane and landed in Kolkata. I prefer Calcutta because I was born that way. The Indians don't seem to mind if we butcher the name of their city, because it's not their city anyway. The British founded Calcutta. And so it is that, being the British capital, it has, of course, a checkered history like you and I, but nonetheless, it's a strange place, because it was the foundation of British India, but for all of their troubles and things that they did to the poor Indian culture, the fact is it was the divine plan that through the British exploitation and greed and conquest, the seeds of globalism would be sown. The lingua franca of the world has proven to be English. The English established the communications, the law of justice, and so forth throughout India, with all its problems and with all their betrayals of their own principles, naturally, as you and I do every day. Nonetheless, and so in that place of Calcutta, it was interesting because we were in this lovely hotel founded in 1840, the Great Eastern Hotel. And across the street and all throughout the British sector were literally crumbling. Trees were growing out of the roofs of the old buildings, because when they got their independence, they so spurned colonialism and imperialism and adopted what the politicians called communism, although they didn't have a clue what communism was. But anyway, they thought they had some idea. They basically turned their backs on all such things, colonial. And so the city is decaying, and yet it was the British interest, the Western interest, and the Sanatana Dharma, the precepts, the revelations of ancient India that in fact spurred the revolution of yoga throughout the world, the revolution of Sanatana Dharma. When the translations, first English translations came to the American shores alone, translated by the British there in Calcutta and Benares, it swept the nation. Emerson, the transcendentalist, Emerson, Thoreau, Walt Whitman. And so it was that it was Bengal, West Bengal and Calcutta, out of which came a ferment, if you will, spurned by when you come and, like Morley was saying to us, when I see India through your eyes as Westerners, I see it afresh, I see it anew. And in fact, I see it with spiritual pride. Well, that's not the right word, is it? With whatever kind of pride is good, I don't know. Somehow it seems an oxymoron or something, but in any case, he sees it afresh. He said, only when I came to Ananda, though he was born and raised a high-caste Brahmin, steeped in the Vedas, Upanishads, and the great treatises of India and so forth, he said, only when I came to the teachings of self-realization did I see the land of India and the teachings of India and her rishis for what it really is. Universal, non-sectarian, in fact, the healing balm for this planet today. And so it was out of West Bengal that came Tagore, the great poet, the Nobel laureate, came Chandra Bose, the great scientist who showed the oneness, that the difference between matter and metals and so forth and animate life through plants and animals was one and the same. The same life flowed in all. Came the great avatar, Ramakrishna Paramahansa, who entered into a state of communion with each and every major religion and showed that each of them could be a pathway to liberation. And of course, his great disciple who came and literally ignited the firestorm of yoga, which was Swami Vivekananda. And then on the heels of his visit came our own dear and beloved Guru. He said, I came not to Indianize you, but to bring you the eternal religion, the eternal teachings. Through Kriya Yoga is destined, as Babaji said, to Lahiri in the cave some of us meditated at last Sunday, a week from today. At that lowly, humble spot on the side of Jongiri Mountain was born a revolution. He said, Kriya Yoga will unite all people in the time ahead, in the centuries and thousands of years, because it brings to us the direct perception of our divinity, not as a precept, not as an intellectual assent merely, but as a state of realization. It doesn't require beliefs, it doesn't require religious affiliation. And thus the light of Kriya Yoga is rapidly expanding throughout this world. A revolution was born. And it came from West Bengal. We sat in the little living room of a home that's not on any map of India. It's not shown in any tour book. It's not a great temple. It's a room a fraction of the size of this, in which various avatars and saints had gathered in the last, well, the house was built in 1880 or 90 or something. So in the last century or more, some of India's greatest modern saints have come to that little room, experiencing or people seeing them in levitation, in samadhi, chanting. I could go on, and Vivekananda, all of these, Lahiri Mahashai, not Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda, the wife of Ramakrishna, Anandamoyi Ma, in one little room they came. To the blessings of our Ananda members and Swami Kriyananda and others, some of whom you know, some of whom you don't. Ananda is in the process of fixing up that little home to preserve it. In fact, we have purchased it and given the woman who lives there, the wife of the descendant of the Ghosh family, Yogananda's family. She will live there until her passing, and Ananda will make the shrine in perpetuity. We have also, some of our members have helped. Around the corner is Yogananda's boyhood home. We meditated in his bedroom where Babaji appeared, knocked on the front door, came up those stairs as we did, and stood there. He didn't refuse to take a seat. And he stood there and he blessed Yogananda, who had meditated for hours, seeking blessing upon his journey to the West, that he not be lost in what he called the fogs of materialism. I don't think there was any risk of that, but nonetheless, it just shows you we should all be careful. In any case, we stood there, we sat there and meditated and prayed. We went upstairs to his little attic room where, as he put it, I found God. It's just, it's so many of you have been there, it's just a nothing. In fact, in the early days, in the days of his days, it was on the roof, and now the roof has been enclosed by other rooms. But nonetheless, it is our privilege, our karmic privilege as Westerners, to go to holy places. When we go there, we are helping to preserve it. Even around Garpar Road, I saw the first of what will surely be many, because the so-called communist government of West Bengal is no more, and they're starting to take up once again pride in their city and state. And if you want to call my example of pride, it's up to you. But anyway, they're building a high-rise apartment in Puri, where Sri Yukteswar has his little ashram, where his body is buried in lotus pose right beneath there in the sand. It's totally enclosed by apartment buildings. India is changing. But when we go there as devotees to draw on that power that's there, because when eternity opens up in a window through the crystal agency of a human soul, it's there forever, so long as devotee bees come to suck the nectar of that eternal promise, which is that we are children of the light. And so when we go there to these shrines, we help to preserve it. One reason is because the folks there, the Indians themselves, in whom resides, even in the throes of their materialistic thrust, which is necessary and right for them to do, for their culture coming up as it is. Nonetheless, how many of us saw in the eyes of cab drivers, of our guide, of our hotel guests, of our hotel people, and so forth, people on the street, the Ayurvedic doctor, and I went into his consulting room, and after my massage, the masseuse said, "You're like cardboard. Have you ever had a massage?" And I said, "No." And anyway, "You need to do this." But anyway, so I went in the doctor's office, and he does this magic. It's strictly magic. I don't know how it works. He does this, he does it. Stick your tongue out. And pretty soon he gave me a reading, just blew me away. Some of my other friends too. "Well, you're very this." I'm not going to tell you what he said, but it was positive, but I just keep it to myself. In any case, I just looked at this guy and just thought, "Are you nuts? How did you get that from my pulse?" But so I'm talking to him, and he says, "I understand you're from Ananda." And of course, I could understand every one out of every three words he said. His English was, better than my whatever it was there. And he said, "I treated Swami Kriyananda once." I couldn't believe it. He said he had been to Italy, and Morley had found this doctor through his clinical friends in Bangalore, where he's going for his PhD in yoga. They have a hospital there where they use yoga pranayama and so forth to treat diabetes and other diseases, quite successfully, I might add. And so he asked them, well, do you recommend an Ayurvedic doctor in Puri? And this was the fellow, he's just amazing. And then there's where there was this connection. Everywhere you go, you find people with open hearts and smiles. It's a privilege, something we don't really, rarely experience here in America. It's a privilege to serve you a meal. It's a privilege to make up your room, to carry your luggage. And usually we say, no, I'll do it myself. But it's their privilege to have a way to serve people. And so, yes, they are rapidly, becoming prosperous or what have you, but they need to do that. It was once one of the richest countries on the planet, as travelers told back in the Middle Ages before foreign conquest. It's no coincidence the British Empire became wealthy as the Indians lost their wealth. You figure it out. But also their caste system has inflicted upon themselves the karmic punishment that they have faced. But they are coming up now. But beneath that retains, what can it be if you, in places like, throughout India, where there are saints who have achieved samadhi, self-realization, in Puri alone, which admittedly is one of the great sacred sites of all of India, but there are so many, take a lifetime to see them all. But nonetheless, in Puri alone, Swami Sri Yukteswar, or Yogananda as a teenage boy lived there with them. So right there. Sanyal Mahashaya, direct disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya, he was just 18 years old, I think, around the time Lahiri passed on in 1895. And so he was quite young. And so he lived much longer and established an ashram there in Puri, where in this tiny little, like a box practically, are some of the ashes of Lahiri Mahashaya. We went upstairs to his bedroom where he lived and meditated. We went to Totapuri's ashram. Totapuri was the guru, they say one of the gurus. Ramakrishna was already an avatar, so it didn't really much matter. But he was the guru who took a piece of glass and ground it at the point between the eyebrows of Ramakrishna in order to get him to slash, as it were, with the sword, the vision of Divine Mother, Goddess Kali, with whom he was greatly in love, but in order him to go beyond the I-thou relationship into the infinite form, the infinite experience of samadhi. He was quite a character. You should see his pictures. He's like a huge person. He had power, spiritual power. You can't go to such places, and even if in the moment you may or may not feel upliftment, you can't go to such a place with your heart open and not receive the touch of bliss, the touch of oneness that is there. We went to a little temple dedicated to Chaitanya, one of the great bhaktis of the Middle Ages, one of the great reformers of Hinduism through the Dark Ages. A beautiful temple. The paintings in there were just mind-blowing. He was a devotee of Krishna. We went, Bhakti found before our trip that Anandamui Ma had an ashram. Nobody knew that. At least no Ananda person knew that she had an ashram there. We met this Swami who was just so blissful. Some of you saw the pictures on Facebook. He was just a character. Just so, I don't know, words seem so stupid sometimes, but we went into this place, and there was her little room where she had been, and she'd come for about a month, and she sort of traveled nonstop, if you know her history, and her devotees created little places where she could stay, so she wouldn't just be in the streets. People had to feed her. She wouldn't even bother to feed herself. As you know from the autobiography, Yogananda met her in 1935 and 6, and you might say they fell in love in a truly spiritual way. Swami Kriyananda was deeply taken by Anandamui Ma. He said, I had the relationship with Anandamui Ma that I could not have with my guru because I was only 22 years old when I met him, and he only lived another 3+ years. But in Anandamui Ma, that heart quality, and she took a special interest in him, especially during the difficult years when he was so crushed and hurt by his treatment, by his fellow devotees. And so we at Ananda have a deep connection with Anandamoyi Ma. Bhakti, God bless her, snuck back one day. I had promised Bhima I would get her back here, lest she not return. But fortunately, she's back somewhere here. There she is. Okay. All right. Anyway, we took a picture of me pulling her out through the gate of Ma's ashram. So we had a lot of fun. But one of the blessings of pilgrimage can't really be articulated in a brochure. It has to do with the heart-opening bonds we experience with one another. When you put aside everything and dedicate your life to go on pilgrimage, and you do so with those of like mind, it's not the same by yourself. It just isn't the same. I've done it. I traveled a year through India. It's not the same. When you go with others who share your devotion, who share your intention, it is a heart-opening experience. And the bonds that we gain together, whether they be ever silent from this time forward, will ever be there. Like channels of grace, channels of light, heart to heart. They remain forever. One of the challenges a traveler to India faces is just the incredible contrast. There we were, embarrassed, I think, frankly, I have traveled in India, but it would be my choice not to go to 4- and 5-star hotels. But I know many of our pilgrims needed that for the comfort and safety and whatever that people need from this country. But what do you do when you walk down the streets of Calcutta and you see the slums and the shacks? And you go to your 5-star hotel? It's not easy. On the train last week, on Monday, we were sitting there at a station, and they had just served us these little meals, train meals. They look like airplane meals, actually. I asked Morley, I said, am I going to eat this stuff? And he said, oh, I love train meals. His father was a train man, worked for the Southern Indian Railways, the same way that Master's father was a trainman for the Nagpur Bengal Railway. So there's kind of a similarity there. So we were sitting, and we had had this luxurious meal at this fancy hotel in the Himalayas to celebrate Bhakti's birthday, which was itself a lot of fun. But we didn't need any food. So we're sitting there at this train stop with these plates on our, full-down tray, just like an airplane thing there. And this little boy comes up to the window. And, we could never know whether the train stop was for a few seconds or a few minutes. It was rarely more than that. And so we were all sort of fastened in there behind our trays. And we didn't need this food sitting on our tray. And this little boy was, right there, the window's right there. And he's on the platform right there, going, like this. It was heartbreaking, really. He didn't look unhappy particularly. He didn't even look unhealthy particularly. But the contrast was more than some of our pilgrims could take. Burst into tears, avert their eyes. But it's symbolic of what you have to confront. But I've had the realization that this world, being a manifestation of God's dream, these are all projections. Their poverty is our spiritual poverty. Nothing we can encounter isn't ours, isn't a reflection of ours. And the solution to poverty isn't legislation, it isn't government spending, it's a change of heart. That duality that we see, the luxury on the one hand, the poverty on the other hand. We were there at Puri on the beach. I forget what we were doing. I think we had just finished our sunrise meditation. Incredible. We did the Gayatri mantras, the sun rose, so forth. We had finished our meditation, and then a group of people go by along the beach carrying a corpse. There it is. Everything is on the streets of India. Because everything on the streets of India is in your mind. Poverty Poverty about how you think about yourself, how you put yourself down. Poverty and fear about your bank account. Sometimes it seems so stupid when you really go inside, but isn't that what occupies people's minds? Oh, I'm not going to retire, I need the money. How many times do I have to hear that? When you're possibly faced with a choice to dedicate your life to God, to service, that's a choice? I know it is a choice, and I don't really critique it. But from the standpoint of the soul, it's not a choice. We all will face that one day or another. These great rishis, these places that we went, were an affirmation, a wormhole to the fact that it is all consciousness. It is all heart. It is all perception. And to travel there to see, sort of blown up on a screen, not them, but you, me, that's what we see. What a great gift to confront it. And it's a great blessing. I do hope I go back to India. I have things I'd like to do and see. I don't know that I will. Morley and I have some plans. This was so successful as a yoga retreat, never done before really, in this way that we did it, that we hope others will want to go with us and experience that. Sure, we could go to Hawaii or Costa Rica. Everybody does that. Puri sits is situated in India in such a way that it has the vibration of our path with Sri Yukteswar. It has the vibration of great masters. It has the beautiful beach and the surf, and it has so much to offer to us. But pilgrimage is the metaphor for our life. It is the metaphor to confront and accept the good, bad, and the ugly as aspects of the reality of God in form. Neither to reject one and hold fast to the other. There is no God but God. There is only Spirit. This is India's great contribution to the world, that it has lived this since time immemorial. As Yogananda says in his autobiography, the continuous culture of India, unbroken since ancient times, is so because it's been bulwarked by the great rishis, by those who have lived and found God in their lives. And to the extent you and I can do that, as often as we can be in remembrance, God remembrance, then we will be, as it were, saved, which is to say, uplifted against the trials and tribulations which come to all of us, amidst the crash of breaking worlds, which is our own lives, internally or externally. There is only one, and it is Spirit. And I feel very privileged to have gone and to share these comments, and we hope many of you can stay afterwards in the yoga hall when some of my fellow pilgrims will share with us their insights. God bless you all.
From Whispers from Eternity, these words of Yogananda: I want to hear thy song in the silence of my soul, thy gentle voice saying, come home. I often heard, but through many lives it was drowned in the tumult of my wild cravings. I have forsaken the jostling crowds of desire. In the solitude of my mind, my devotion bursts to hear thy voice. Take away every dream memory of earthly sounds that yet lurks in my mind. I want to hear thy still voice, ever singing in the silence of my soul. We'd like to